Mr. Paul, many thanks. That was a very kind, indeed overly generous introduction. I am enormously grateful to you for making available the marvelous facilities of Credit Suisse so that all of us can gather tonight and consider a subject of importance to the United States. I am equally grateful to Noel Latif for inviting me to be part of this gathering. Noel and I began talking about a moment to come together and consider Kosovo some months ago, and no time quite seemed right. The crisis remains today in full swing, and so this moment is probably as good as any. I'm also delighted to be in the presence of many, many old friends. Bill Lures and Wendy in the front row. Wendy will not admit it, but she has been a major figure in trying to ensure that Kosovo emerges as not only an independent state, but a democratic state that is inclusive and treats all of its people fairly. So Wendy, thank you for your work, and I'm delighted to be in your presence tonight, and any difficult questions I'm going to send your direction. Ladies and gentlemen, the starting point is, as Mr. Paul pointed out, a month ago, yesterday, the 17th of February, Kosovo joined the ranks of independent nations. Independent, yes. Independent in a very special way, a supervised independence with an oversight body from the international community as described in the Adasari Plan, a independence that will have to be protected for some time to come by a NATO force that's been present for nearly 9 years and which today numbers some 16,000 men, including 1,200 Americans who, as a brigade-sized force, are actually in part deployed in northern Kosovo as we meet and speak together tonight. The event of Kosovo's independence, to me, is an enormously important event, not only for the United States that has invested so much in that country and in the region, but for Europe, and by extension, the rest of the world. It may not be the lead item on your evening news, but it's enormously important. The decision to reach independence, to my way of thinking, was inevitable. There was no way other than according Kosovo independence. The decision was right given the history, a history particularly over the past decade of quasi-independence under a UN tutelage, preceded by a nightmare decade of Serbian repression and violence at the end of the 1990s that forced nearly 1 million Kosovar Albanians out of their homes and driven towards the borders, tens of thousands of properties burned and destroyed, well better than 10,000 Kosovars killed in Slobodan Milosevic's repression. It was right, therefore, to take the consequences of the dreadful decade of the 90s and convert it into an independence of a people that wanted to stand on its own feet. It was right as a decision as well because there was really no alternative. It was inconceivable to me when I began my role as representative of the United States some 2 years ago. It was inconceivable to me that the population, the majority population, the 90% plus majority population would ever go back and live again under Serbian rule. It was inconceivable to me that even the framework of autonomy that emerged in the last 6 months of the negotiations would begin to provide adequate expression for the peoples, the majority peoples of Kosovo. So if you weren't going to go back under Serbian rule, if a Serbian flag was not, or sovereignty was not to pertain for Kosovo, then the alternative of continuing UN trusteeship, if you will, it wasn't formally that, that was inconceivable as well. The Secretary General made it very clear, both Kofi Annan and then his successor, Ban Ki-moon, that the UN had carried out its mission, it had exhausted its mission, its ability to carry on and be able to govern a territory had been achieved, and little more could be done. I say that because there are many friends of the great institution of the United Nations in this room tonight, and I ask all of you to think about our responsibilities if we want the United Nations to be able to hold the receptacle while peace is negotiated and made. Then one has to let the UN off the hook when the job is done. You cannot forever condemn the United Nations to try to hold in place a situation which we, members of the international community, cannot resolve politically. Excuse me. So Kosovo, settling Kosovo, reaching final status was important for the United Nations. There was not a choice. There was neither a return to Serbian sovereignty nor a continuation of the United Nations. And if one was to reach final status, then independence was the only logical outcome. But I'm going to argue, furthermore, the decision to reach final status and arrive at independence for Kosovo was right for a number of other reasons, all important to us as Americans. The first reason is that until Kosovo was settled, until there was a definition of its future, until its borders had been set, the crisis that roiled the 1990s and over the breakup of the former Yugoslavia would not be over. Kosovo was the last of the Yugoslav territories that cried out for definition. And until that definition occurred, everyone in the region would be sitting on the edge of their chairs, notably Serbia, which needs to have an opportunity to reflect on its own future, decide where it wants to go. And as long as Kosovo remained undecided, Serbia would be undecided about her own future. But I also believe that settling Kosovo now makes it possible, not immediately, but possible, for the region of southwestern Europe and the Balkans to begin to evolve towards a better future, to be part of the European Union. And like those other elements of the other recent additions to the European Union, to find ways to bury the problems of ethnicity in a greater European economic family and a political family. Look today across Eastern Europe, where ethnic problems were part of our realities, Hungarians in Romania, Hungarians in Slovakia, minorities in the Baltic nations. There is a way inside of Europe to work out the rights of minorities, and therefore the EU is a necessary outcome. Kosovo's settlement now means that every piece of the Balkans can look towards inclusion in the Brussels family. But I think furthermore, for us as Americans, with Kosovo settled, the last serious territorial quarrel in Europe has been put behind us, and we can literally contemplate a free, whole, and secure. And until Kosovo was settled and settles down, a job still to be done, that prospect was not likely. I was proud, finally, to be part of American diplomacy during better than 2 years, in which we set our minds on retying bonds of communications, common action, common reflection with our European friends and forging common diplomacy. It was that diplomacy that carried us together throughout the negotiation and on through Kosovo's independence. But it was a long road. For all of us today, perhaps that road began in 1989 on the field of Blackbirds, the great historical site of Serbian nationalism, when Slobodan Milosevic annulled the autonomous institutions of the province of Kosovo. And during the 90s, when Albanian Kosovars were forced to study underground, try to exercise their rights in furtive manners, ending in the dreadful events of 1999, the intervention of NATO, it was a terrible period in the life of any people, and it ended in a moment of the worst ethnic cleansing modern Europe had known. But that wasn't to be the end of Kosovo's misfortune. Though the United Nations was present and NATO present in 2004, such were the tensions between the communities. In March of 2004, violence broke out again, and this time many Serbs suffered, fled the country, properties were destroyed. But at least the international community was brought to its senses and recognized that it could not stand idly by and leave Kosovo aside, languishing under a UN protectorate, but rather it had to be settled, and a political settlement was required. It was as a result of those events of 2004 that eventually the Secretary General, at the urging of the United States, Britain, France, Italy, Germany, Russia, asked for an international arbitrator, and former Finnish President Martti Ahtisaari, who had played the role of consequence in 1999 in convincing Slobodan Milosevic to withdraw from Kosovo in the first instance, was given the job as the Secretary General's representative to negotiate a final status conclusion. I was party to Martti Ahtisaari's negotiation for those 18 months plus. He worked with incredible diligence to try to find bridges across the gaps between Kosovars of all ethnicities, to find ways of accommodating Belgrade's most important interests, find ways of satisfying the aspirations of the majority population. And he developed a plan, the Ahtisaari proposal, which came to light just about a year ago now, which was taken to the Security Council. And there, as a result of increasingly public positions taken by Moscow in the late spring of 2007, during the summer, on 6 different occasions, Moscow made it clear it would veto any outcome that included the Ahtisaari plan, and notably its provision for the independence of Kosovo. Well, we were stymied last summer in the face of Russian opposition, and it was at that moment that the President of France, the newly elected President Nicolas Sarkozy, stepped forward with the idea that there should be one more chance for diplomacy. And yes, once again, diplomats were called to the fore. I was honored to join Wolfgang Ischinger, representing the European Union, a distinguished German diplomat, and a representative of the Russian Foreign Ministry, Sasha Botchang-Harshenko, for nearly 5+ months of intense talks with both Belgrade and Pristina in an attempt to see if we could find a bridge over this very wide gap. And as we were wont to say as the negotiation went forward, we'd leave no stone unturned. We indeed did not. We explored every avenue possible, and none found favor with the two sides. And so on the 10th of December, in our report to the Secretary General, to the contact group and the Secretary General, we were forced to conclude that there was no common basis for a settlement, and by derivation, the time was right to reach a decision. Not a one of us who ended the negotiation in December looked to the future with equanimity. There were huge risks that we could imagine the territory would face. You could imagine violence. It wasn't to be excluded that with the sensitivities involved, that there would be elements inside of Kosovo that would rise to seek retribution. Couldn't rule out either that there would be those who in the Serbian community would strike back or cross the border to make Serbia's case. Couldn't rule out the fact that the problem could spread elsewhere in the region. Indeed, take out the very basis of the compromise in Bosnia that was wrought in Dayton. After all, we'd seen a challenge to the integrity of Dayton earlier in 2007. Nor could we rule out that Serbian retribution would not disrupt commerce, electrical supplies, even water supplies throughout the region. We couldn't rule out the fact, given the warnings from Moscow, that there might be similar activities, would be activities sparked by Kosovo in Abkhazia, South Ossetia, Transnistria, that the example of Kosovo splitting off from Serbia would be replicated elsewhere. Well, the worst of my fears and those of many others in December of last year and coming on into this year have happily, ladies and gentlemen, not been realized. But that doesn't mean we don't face a serious and continuing issue with the question of Kosovo, now freshly independent. We face a very difficult situation. While none of the worst risks proved to be accurate, Serbia has set a course to make the point that Kosovo has not left its fold and that Kosovar Serbs will continue to have strong, indeed governing ties with Serbia itself. This has particularly taken root in northern Kosovo, where north of the Ibar River, in the northern part of the town of Mitrovica, you've seen a series of direct challenges by the Serbian community there to the United Nations, border posts destroyed, stone throwing demonstrations, on and off, and then finally the events, the storming of a UN court, and the reaction when that court was retaken by the UN police force, and activities that have resulted in the death of a Ukrainian UN policeman. A tragic and ugly event. An event that I suggest Belgrade must consider very carefully. For those who, like me, have been close to the situation in Kosovo, we know that for many years, Belgrade has exercised de facto control of the land north of the Ibar. And in the community of Serbs living in that area were embedded substantial numbers of Serbian secret policemen, and they're still there, and political party representatives. The actions of the last days cannot have been taken without full knowledge of Belgrade, and therefore I, and I suspect all of you, look to the Serbian government, which stands for much better, to take control of its people and discourage this kind of violence and open confrontation with the international community and the legitimacy of the United Nations, which after all is still present in Kosovo because Resolution 1244 that brought Kosovo under UN rule in the first place has not been repealed. The UN is a legitimate, internationally recognized instrument in Kosovo, and anyone who takes it on acts in flagrant violation of international responsibility. And so I repeat to you tonight, I look to the authorities in Belgrade not only to maintain order on the streets of the Serbian capital so there's no repetition of the burning of embassies, but takes full responsibility for the troubles in northern Kosovo itself. And then I have to say I look beyond Belgrade and I look to Moscow as well. Moscow has stood firmly behind Serbia, that Russians have defined in their own national interests, an issue that they are fully entitled to define, even though I have never quite understood why Kosovo is central to Russian national concerns and Russian national interests. But so, having made that point and stood by the fact that Kosovo should remain part of Serbia until there is a mutually acceptable agreement to separate, then too Moscow bears a responsibility for assuring that violence is eschewed. I'd like to think, over time, other aspects of Russian opposition to Kosovo independence, the declared opposition to the deployment of the European mission, a declared opposition to Kosovo's eventual inclusion in the United Nations, will fade and set aside. It is my view that Russia has found itself largely isolated in Europe and by this country in the attitude that it is struck towards Kosovo. But Kosovo is on its way. As Mr. Paul noted, a number of nations, principal European nations, have recognized the country, as has the United States. Today, I'm pleased to tell you that Japan and Canada both followed suit and completed their recognition. Important gestures on their own, for now there is a critical mass inside the World Bank and the international financial institutions to be able to bring Kosovo into those bodies and make it possible to mobilize the international public funding that will be required to build Kosovo's infrastructure and begin to web it into the modern Western Balkans. But whatever the degree of international recognition, Kosovo is a troubled place and will remain a fragile entity for some time to come. And that all of us recognized in the pursuit of the settlement. And that's why Marty Ahtisaari's plan called for a period of supervision to make certain that the rights of minority populations in Kosovo are fully protected. They are. Under the plan, there is no higher definition anywhere in Europe of the rights of a minority than you will find in the Ahtisaari prescriptions for the minority Serbian community in Kosovo. Serbs will live in municipalities of almost totally their own governance, their police, their schools, their health systems, use of their language, double passports, and their churches are bound in exclusion zones that mean they can never be violated by international understanding, now adopted by the Kosovar Assembly into law and will be also enshrined in the short to be forthcoming Kosovar Constitution. But all the legal pieces of paper are important. They express a political direction on the part of the new state of Kosovo and a determination of the international community. But it's going to take more than political expressions to make the new Kosovo work. It's going to take the will and intention of the international community to mobilize the resources. During the UN period, little sustained or sustainable investment occurred in Kosovo. Its roads are of another epoch, its power system is inadequate, its infrastructure needs significant repair. But once it is, it's a hub for the Western Balkans, and as the Western Balkans looks towards Europe, part of the network that will lead to the inclusion inside of Europe itself. But the final responsibility for Kosovo lies, as it should, on the backs of those, in the hands of those who are responsible for Kosovo herself, the Kosovar majority population. It is a poor land. Half its people are unemployed. Many have found work outside the country. It lives heavily on worker remittances. It has a bad history of criminality and of corrupt public authorities, all issues that have to be addressed by a brand new state. But I stand before you tonight expressing a very firm view that the Kosovars are up to that challenge, particularly if they are aided and bracketed by the international community. After all, they did enjoy many years of near autonomy when they were part of the former Yugoslavia. In the years of repression in the 90s, they operated a virtual parallel government underground. In the 9 years, 8+ years of UN supervision, Kosovars were tested in many of the aspects of modern government. Kosovo has the institutions, it has the enthusiasm and the will, and it has the support of Europe, the United States, and we hope a growing coalition of international nations that wish it well and realize that in its peace and its success is the beginning of a road towards a peaceful, free, and secure Europe. Ladies and gentlemen, with those remarks as an introduction to the subject, let me invite any questions any of you might have. But again, let me repeat my thanks to all of you for listening to me tonight and giving me a chance to state a case on a subject that I've lived closely and believe in passionately. Thank you.